All right. Well, good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Thank you all for participating in this, the second of our 4 virtual ICDP Disaster Symposium presentations. My name is Barb Clark, and I'm the Training and Exercise Manager for the Intermountain Center for Disaster Preparedness, located here in Salt Lake City, Utah. As we embark on this brave new world, we hope that you find some comfort in hearing how others have dealt with various disasters and tragedies and how they've been able to come out the other side stronger and more resilient. Although the networking opportunities are not the same on these Zoom platforms as it was in person, if there is someone that you want to connect with following the presentation, please let me know and I'll do my best to connect you. Following this and all of the 2020 symposium presentations, as long as I have your correct email address on from the train system, you'll be receiving a SurveyMonkey evaluation. That way you can tell us your thoughts and help us develop a stronger symposium in the future. So hopefully you will take a few minutes to put that together. It takes about 4 or 5 minutes to do that. We really hope that by next fall, we'll be in a position to return to in-person gatherings. Fingers crossed, we'll have another great symposium live and in person then. If you need a certificate of participation for any of these presentations, please email me and I will send you a copy. And as a matter of basic housekeeping, please follow the common virtual meeting courtesies by making sure that your microphone is on mute. You can choose to keep your video on or off. And if you have questions, we will be monitoring the chat area. So please submit your questions during the presentation through that portal. At the end of the presentation, we'll open it up to additional questions. And at that time, you are welcome to ask by unmuting yourself and asking them verbally. Also, please change your display if you have not already done so to include your first and last name. That way I can give you credit in your train account. And if you are watching with a group, as I said before, please email me or put the list of names in the chat area so that we know who all is attending. This is really important because we utilize grant money to produce these symposiums. So we need to, justify why we ask for what we ask for. If you're not familiar with how to change your name, if you just go down to the bottom of your screen where it says participants, click on that, and then you'll find your name in the list of participants. Hover over it where it says more, just click on that and you'll be able to hit rename and change your name. Again, I just want to thank you for your continuous support of the Intermountain Center for Disaster Preparedness. And if we can be of service to you or your organization, please feel free to reach out. We're here to help. And now, without further ado, let's get started. I would like to introduce our speaker for today. Her name is Elizabeth Ciolino. She's a former Chicago Fire Department paramedic. She currently is working as the Illinois State Coordinator for CARES, where they strive to improve pre-hospital cardiac arrest outcomes. Prior to this appointment, Elizabeth was an ambulance commander with the Chicago Fire Department, where she spent 17 of her 23 years in the fire service. During her time at Chicago Fire, she was assigned to the busiest ambulance in the nation, and they responded to over 7,500 calls annually, many of which were mass casualty responses. In addition to responding to 911 calls, Elizabeth has been an educator for over 15 years and lectures locally, regionally, and nationally on EMS and pre-hospital trauma. Ms. Ciolino has been recognized on numerous occasions and received several awards for outstanding performance with the Chicago Fire Department. We're fortunate to have Elizabeth here with us today as she shares the experiences that occurred on November 19th, 2018, when Dr. Tamara O'Neill was gunned down in the parking lot of Mercy Hospital in Chicago just before the gunman entered the emergency department and began a shooting rampage. Please join me as we welcome Beth Ciolino. And Beth, I'm sorry, did I pronounce your name correctly?
Yeah, that's fine. Ciolino, Ciolino, whichever.
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine, Barb. Don't even worry about it.
It's all you.
Thank you very much for joining me today and us. And thank you, Barb and Karen, for inviting me to come do this. My colleague and I, Terry Campbell, you can see on the screen, we were the two that initially put this presentation together because it was something that has never happened here in the city of Chicago, which is where I'm currently sitting right now, enjoying the beautiful weather. And I felt like it was important to share this because not everybody is as fortunate as we are to be in such a large city that we were able to mitigate it so well. And there's some points I want to take away from this, that I understand the way that we ran things is not going to be the same as where you live or work, just because the amount of resources and how close the hospitals are. A little background about Chicago Fire Department. Unlike most other cities, we work all under the same union. We're local to paramedics and firemen. There is no separation. We all work in the firehouse together as one big dysfunctional family. So we do not run out of hospitals or anything like that. On an average, the city runs 2,500 to 3,000 calls a day just for police just for fire and EMS. And despite the fact that we have 3 million people residing in the city of Chicago, we only have 80 ALS ambulances. So to keep our response times tiered responses so that we're compliant nationally and locally, we also have 47 ALS engines and 21 ALS trucks. So when I go through this presentation, I just want you to understand the amount of resources that we had to mitigate this event, because I know that each city and town works different. In the city of Chicago, we're under IDPH, the Illinois Department of Public Health, Region 11. We have 3 project medical directors that are in charge of the city of Chicago, north, central, and south located. So you understand what EMS system that we're working in. And of course, I go to flip the screen and now it's not working. There we go. So we wanted to recognize the victims of the shooting first off. Dr. Tamara O'Neill. We all have those favorite ER nurses and physicians that we run into every single day. And Tamara was no exception to that. She was an amazing woman. Officer Samuel Jimenez, unfortunately, also lost his life trying to engage the shooter. And Dana Less was a resident PharmD student who happened to be in the lobby at the time the incident occurred. So just quickly, we're going to run over the objectives. Defining an internal disaster, review the timeline. The timeline was picked through radio traffic and not through people's actual recorded events. Staging considerations for police and fire, safety considerations, and critical care transport needs that arose because of this event. So how do you define an internal disaster? And the reason that we put up there similar to porn was because if you remember, the Supreme Court justice in the 1950s said, I can't describe porn, but I know it when I see it. That's how we feel about any types of disasters at the hospital, on campus. Any event that endangers patients or staff, need for relocation or evacuation. I'm sure it's happened in every city. Fires, floods, any type of hostage event, anything like that. Little background on Mercy Hospital. Mercy Hospital was founded in 1852, and it's a med-surg hospital. And I think it was 1912, the assassination from President Teddy Roosevelt, who was visiting Chicago, was treated at Mercy Hospital. It's a level 2 trauma center. It only has 292 beds. Prior to this event actually occurring, as fate would have it, 1 week prior to this event on November 19th, they had active shooter training within the hospital. The ER at Mercy is staffed with one physician, one attending physician, and 2 to 3 staffed ER nurses, and then the rest fill in with agency nurses. So, Dr. Tamara was dating a gentleman, little background here. They were engaged to be married. She broke off the engagement and had an order of protection placed against him along with his ex-wife. He did apply for employment with the Chicago Fire Department, but was fired in the academy section in the first few months of employment due to physical and verbal abuse against multiple female candidates. The shooter actually sat in the emergency room waiting room while Dr. Tamara was working her shift. She ended around 3 o'clock. He sat there for 30 minutes waiting to talk to her just outside of triage in the ER waiting room. So the event, I'm clicking through these really fast because it's just easier for me. In the event that happened, Tamara had gotten off her shift at 3 o'clock. She did sign out. She was walking out to the parking lot at the hospital where she was met by her ex-fiance, who started to try and talk to her and engage with her and get her attention. This had not been the first time that he had done this. She immediately called 911 and was on the phone with 911 operators, and you can hear the entire event unfold. For obvious reasons, we took out the part of the clip where Dr. O'Neill was shot, unfortunately, in the head. If this clip, as we respond to events in our careers, we always see the aftermath of what has happened. However, I'm going to tell you that the audio on this clip is pretty chilling, and that if you prefer not to listen to it, as soon as the audio clip's over, I'm going to flip to the next screen and you can come back and join this. Barb, if you want to play the audio clip now, it's just a few minutes long.
Okay, so can you quit sharing, Beth?
Sure.
Okay, and then let me start sharing. Sorry, hang tight, folks.
(2018) 15 hours, 14 minutes, and 23 seconds. Juan, don't shoot me. I'm at 2525 South Michigan Avenue. This guy is threatening to shoot me. Please come. 2525 South Michigan Avenue. Yes, please. Who has the gun? What color shirt does he have on? He has on a black hoodie and a black jacket. He's Hispanic? Yes. So is the gun in his hand right now? I don't know where his gun is, but he said he has a gun. 133 units, 10 1 on the citywide. This is a person with a gun. 2525 South Michigan, coming with the caller says she doesn't see the gun, but he threatened he would shoot her and himself. He's 31. No further information is on for social care. You're on 2525 South Michigan Avenue. We're right around the corner. I'm sorry. So far. 2525 South Michigan Avenue. Yes. Stay away from me. Leave me alone. What's your name? Male Hispanic, about 32 years old, in a black jacket. And what are you wearing? Leave me alone. I have on a black jacket. He's threatening to kill me. No, you don't threaten somebody's life. I told you I would. You don't show up at my job. You don't threaten my life and tell me you're going to take my life and yours and get in my car. Are you outside your car right now? I'm sorry. Are you standing outside your car right now? Outside right now. And you said you're wearing a black jacket? And it's also coming in as an assault in progress at 2510 South King. The caller says she's leaving Murphy. So my job. Again, in 2525 South Michigan and 2510 South Key, somewhere between there. He threatened me and said he was going to shoot me and him. I need the police here. Okay, listen, I'm going to stay on the phone with you. I'm going to stay on the phone with you until they come. He got mad because I told him I was going to get my attorney involved. Okay, so he showed up at your work. He's applying for this broken engagement, and he's currently getting another call in front of the emergency room for that person with the gun in front of the emergency room. In a male white, black hat, white hoodie, and black coat. Says he has a gun, and he's threatening his girlfriend, ex-girlfriend. No, get away from me. I will, when the police
more time in the description.
Don't touch me. Male white, black hat, white hoodie, black coat. Don't touch me. Get away from me. You're making it worse. Leave me alone. Hello? Hello? Come on. Hello? Where are you? Outside of the hospital. Hello? All units, regular 10-1, outside of Mercy Hospital. No further information. Shots fired in front of Mercy Hospital.
163. We got a HCP. Let's get squad over here. Let's get more cars. Make sure we have a perimeter set up over here. Starting over at Michigan Avenue. He's in the parking lot.
Hello?
He's in the parking lot, gun in his hand.
All right, we have him in the parking lot with gun in his hand. In Mercy's parking lot with the gun in his hand. We need more units at Mercy Hospital.
Please don't anybody, we're going now. Don't anybody approach him. We don't need anybody coming into that lot.
No one approach him. No one go into the lot. All right, all units just go. Let me know when you get on scene.
Live shots fired, squad.
We have live shots fired. 4 shots fired in the parking lot of Mercy Hospital. Hello?
Okay, it's back to you, Beth. Beth, you're still muted. And there we go.
Okay. I realized that that audio clip was hard to hear for some people and hard to decipher for others. What I had did was I overlaid the police traffic with the 911 call itself so that you can understand the timeline of what was occurring. As she realized that he was there and she had purposely walked into the parking lot to draw him away from the hospital because he did have a history of violence so that no one else could possibly be injured. So what happens is he engages Dr. O'Neill and shoots her in the parking lot. At the time that that occurred, there happened to be a Chicago Fire Department ambulance who was dropping off a patient in the emergency room. The paramedic officer was inside printing the report and her partner was outside in the parking lot who initially called police. The security guards also called police, and once shots were fired, people from inside the hospital also called. And much like other active shooters that have happened across the United States, because gunfire echoes, it was hard to decipher where the shots were coming from. So it was initially hard to find the offender. At this point, he ran back into the hospital, just randomly shooting people. Unfortunately, Dana Last, who was a Farm D resident, stepped off the elevator at that time, and she was shot transverse across the chest and immediately went down. The shooter then comes back outside into the parking lot near the emergency room and starts shooting at the police officers. After he engages several shots with the police department, the police officers, Officer Jimenez, who only had a couple years on the job at the time, and his partner went inside and followed the shooter, who went back into the hospital. They were in a long hallway, and Officer Jimenez had peeked around a corner to see where the offender was, and the offender shot Officer Jimenez in the neck. It caught him in the jugular. At this time, Chicago Police Department SWAT team had also arrived and started to engage the suspect. The SWAT team saw Officer Jimenez holding his neck with copious amounts of blood coming from him. He was still ambulatory at the time, walking towards him in the hallway. It was a split-second decision, and what the police officers are trained to do, which was neutralize the shooter. So they pushed past Officer Jimenez and engaged fire with the shooter, who was later down. Officer Jimenez shot through the carotid artery. I don't know how the police departments work over by you guys, but through Chicago SWAT, they are medically trained up to the paramedic level, and they have their own PMD and their own set of SOPs separate from the paramedics on the fire department because their job's different. So what they can offer people and patients is their actual SOPs kind of supersede ours in the fact that they're allowed to do a lot more things. When Officer Jimenez went down, the CPD SWAT officer, who all carry IFAC kits on them with tourniquets, chest shields, quick clot, and other life-saving devices, immediately went to render aid to Officer Jimenez. But unfortunately, it was too late for him. So this is like almost a mentally exhausting lecture. So meanwhile, back in Dodge, what was going on in the hospital? So at the time, they had 22 patients in the emergency department, and there were gunshots heard, right? Everybody hears about run, hide, fight, which is what the hospital was taught to do, is shelter and secure in place. Like I said, when the offender went inside and started shooting into the hallways and just outside the emergency room, the staff inside the hospital had no idea where the gunshots were coming from. So they didn't know if they were running towards gunfire or away from it. Some people locked themselves in closets, some in the x-ray department, some near pharmacy. So patients were moved, although the hospitals are taught to, the hospitals are taught to, like, your safety comes first and then the patient. So if you can move patients to a safer area, if you cannot, you're supposed to save yourself. So all of the, it says most of the ER staff evacuated. The truth of the matter was all of the ER staff evacuated. So I think that this picture is absolutely hysterical because I feel like it sums up my career in EMS. We've all been on those runs where things are just going awry and you just want to light the ambulance on fire and walk away. But the reason I say this ain't your granddaddy's MCI is we were taught, I went to EMT school, as I'm dating myself here, back in 1994. And we were taught to use the triage tags and the tarps, right? Anytime that there's an MCI, we want to triage the patients, move them to tarps, get ambulances into the area and secured, and get the patients off into a round robin to drop them off and come back. We have seen over and over again in active shooter situations that that is not what happens. So my only advice to you is this, and I don't say this because I think that I'm better than anyone that's participating today, because even after all these years, I still make mistakes and that's how I learn. But I was taught a very long time ago, do not be a squirrel, make a decision. The road of EMS is paved with flat squirrels in the road who could not decide one way or the other. So right, wrong, or indifferent, just make a decision and start moving that way. It can always turn later on. But for every minute that you don't make a decision during an MCI, adds 10 minutes to the back end of the entire event. So we try and encourage everybody to just start moving in a particular direction. Care for the victims. So what ended up happening was the SWAT team, the CFD medics that were there on scene, and the rest of the ER staff, once the shooter was neutralized, came back to render care for the victims. All patients were brought into the emergency department at that time. Dr. O'Neill was a traumatic arrest. She was worked and transported. Dana Less, Pharm D student, worked and transported. I realize now that we work traumatic arrests because they're our own, and we considered all three of these people our own: the officer, the Pharm D student, and the physician. Excuse me. I understand that perhaps where you work, you do not have the resources to possibly treat and transport traumatic arrests. And there is nothing wrong with that. Again, I say, coming from a big city, we had the resources to do that. Everybody knew at the time that they were rendering aid, that it was not going to make a difference in the outcome. Dana Less had a chest shield applied to her by the SWAT team. The SWAT team is taught any penetrating trauma from belly button to shoulder blades, 360 degrees, to go ahead and apply a chest shield. The chest shields that are out now are fantastic because they're self-venting. It's not like the old days where we had the Vaseline gauze, which we still have in a lot of our ambulances, that anytime anybody's ever tried to use it, it sticks to your glove and you have to slide it off to put it onto the patient. These are self-venting. We joke around when we're teaching police officers for any type of medical care, what's the signs and symptoms of pneumothorax or a tension pneumothorax or a hemothorax? And the reality of the situation is we don't care. We don't care what the signs and symptoms are. You put a chest shield on them, you get them outside, you get them transported, you get them moved on. Inside a active shooter is not the time that we're going to plurally decompress patients. To be honest with you, it is hard enough to auscultate lung sounds when you're in a quiet environment, and we're all used to doing it in the back of the rig with the sirens, but then to hear the radio traffic, gunfire, people screaming, there's no way you're going to be able to diagnose that in that type of situation. So we teach the officers to cover it and move on. Officer Mena's also got a chest shield, pressure dressing. He was also worked and transported. So for this particular event, we had 19 ambulances respond, all ALS ambulances. We had 9 fire suppression vehicles, 9 auxiliary. The auxiliary vehicles included like command buses, oxygen. We have 2 large buses in the city of Chicago that fit several patients apiece, so many reds, so many yellows. Believe it or not, in the city of Chicago, with an event like this, we use public transportation buses to gather up the greens. And we also encourage the greens and yellows to help move the reds, because there is enough people that are running out that were injured that they were able to help one another. We also had 16 fire and EMS chiefs on the scene. So then the problem came into what do you do with the patients, right? You have all of these patients in the emergency room. Some of them had chest tubes, some of them had blood, other drugs hanging. We had the 3 reds, excuse me, 13 yellows and 7 greens. The ER staff is traumatized. They moved the victims back into the ER to work them. And there was some communication between the ER manager on whether to stay and play and work them there or move them out to level 1 trauma centers. We have so many level 1 trauma centers in the city of Chicago that you could throw a stone and hit one within 10 minutes. So the decision was made to move all of the patients outside of that hospital. Again, I understand that in other areas, if you're transporting hospitals are 20 or 30 miles away, that might not be an option for you. So you might have to stay and work in the event that occurred. We used city buses for the blues and greens that we had, and we had the 22+1, we called it. I realize that this is a very serious subject, but to lighten the mood a little bit, there was a patient who was transported to Mercy Hospital. She was a patient in her 80s, had complaints of signs and symptoms of an exacerbating problem for weeks and decided to go that day. There's another hospital in the city that people really don't want to go to. And when the shooting occurred, the ER staff and the paramedics were unaware as they were rolling the patient in. Somebody from X-ray pulled them into the closet and locked them in there. And the patient was saying that, I didn't come here to get shot up today. Just take me over to that other awful hospital. But so she'd rather go to the, we called it the hospital, the barnyard, than get shot up at Mercy. So she ended up actually going there. So now we had all these patients that needed to be transported, and we didn't have enough critical care agencies within the Chicago Fire Department. We're not allowed to take chest tubes, any type of blood drips, certain other medications. So we were trying to figure out how to get these critical care patients transported out of here. And the decision came down and was approved by higher ups that there are a lot of nurses that also work as paramedics on the Chicago Fire Department, and they're ICU, PACU nurses, CCU nurses that felt comfortable taking the patients with the various drips and chest tubes to the hospital. So it was okayed for transport because we didn't have enough critical care ambulances to get these people out. So kudos to the paramedics that are also nurses. Patients were transported to 4 trauma hospitals and 1 went to a level 2. Dr. O'Neill was transported to University of Chicago. The attending physician that took over and worked her resus had to recuse himself after 10 minutes because unfortunately they went to medical school together and they were close friends. So part of the things that we learned within the Mercy Hospital shooting is to have a safe word. And know that, not that word, the YouTube video, pineapple juice, but after talking with the SWAT team and CPD upper echelon, we found out that as the hospital was being swept to make sure that there was not an additional shooter, that people that had locked themselves into closets or x-ray rooms or other secure areas of the hospital were afraid to come out, even though they said Chicago Police Department. So within the schools, within the city of Chicago, and any type of active shooter training, we always tell people to make sure that they have a safe word. The hospital administrators and the security staff should alert the police departments to what that safe word is so that people know and understand it's all clear. The other problem that CPD and SWAT had was every single department has to be open to the police departments. And I understand for hospital administration, it was a big issue that no units are off limits when they're doing sweeps of the building. So for instance, they had an issue when they went to go to the psychiatric unit that the psychiatric nurse was refusing to let the police department in, and you had 4 armed SWAT officers standing there trying to negotiate with a nurse who wasn't going to let people in because she was worried that it would upset her patients, but they were looking for multiple shooters. So the police department was eventually let in. So one thing to consider when you're working with your in-hospital training is the fact that when they're looking for offenders, no units are off limits. Just to go over the timeline so that you could see how fast this all occurred. Nationally, the average time for an active shooter event is less than 10 minutes. And this was less than 7 by the time that the shooter was neutralized. At 15:14, the doctor called, Tamara called 911 to report about her ex-fiance. 1 minute later, CPD was dispatched to her location. 2 minutes after that, so 3 minutes after her initial 911 call, Dr. O'Neill was shot in the parking lot. 1 minute after that, CPD arrives on scene. You can see that it calls out for 10-1 for shots fired. On police and fire, we don't use 10 codes on the fire department, but we do use that code. We use 10-1 codes for any time that our life or anybody in our immediate area's life is in danger. We call for a 10-1, which means officer in distress. At 15:25, Dana Less was shot in the lobby. And then 2 minutes later, Officer Jimenez was shot in the hallway. 2 minutes after Officer Jimenez was shot, there were reports that the shooter was actually down. So the whole thing occurred in less than 8 minutes. So the immediate aftermath, you are not even going to believe when I tell you this. The emergency room actually opened the next day by noon. They had ED support staff there to debrief or counseling, CISD. They had multiple in-house counselors there, and the emergency room opened fully by noon the next day. So what happens long-term? When we were talking to the ER nurses that still work there, that were there the day of the shooting, they said that some of the nurses there did suffer from PTSD, and that not that you can gain any solace in this, but the fact that it was domestic related and not gang related or any type of family argument where somebody entered the emergency room and then began randomly shooting, or a psychiatric issue. Believe it or not, no staff quit the emergency room department at Mercy. Obviously, there were people that were traumatized. You didn't have to be in the emergency room to be traumatized. When the PharmD student, Dana Less, was walking off the elevator, that elevator was actually, had 3 other people in it. And she just happened to be the first one that was stepped off. When we talked to them, they said that there was like a strange comfort in the fact, knowing that, again, that it was a domestic issue. So when I put this presentation together with my colleague, Terry, who is a nurse at University of Chicago and also a flight RN and nurse extraordinaire, we put together like a wish list of what the hospitals and nurses wished that they had. And at the time, Mercy Hospital did not have traditional security officers. They were unarmed. They did poor mitigation of limiting patient and family. Fights would break out inside the hospital, in the emergency room, and the triage waiting area. They hire new police officers that are armed with training, but there's not as many, obviously, that occurred right after the shooting. It was 2 years ago this month, and due to budgetary cuts, they don't have as many security guards as they did prior to. They still do active shooter training for the run, hide, fight. So as a hospital administration and people that are going to be put in charge of these events, one of the things that we wanted to stress was to take your authority and push it down to the lowest level possible, because those are the people that are going to begin to mitigate the event before you get involved. So like, we tell people all the time to make sure that their housekeeping staff is aware of what they're supposed to be doing, not just nurses and physicians, but x-ray techs, phlebotomy, pharmacy, everybody down to the working level of the hospital needs to know what to do, and you need to encourage them to make decisions based on what is going on at that time, because to not do anything at all is not helping the situation for any victims or your hospitals. Make sure they have or are aware of designated places to hide. They talk about the bull, which is a device that I'm sure you guys have seen because of active shooter with schools, that goes on the door that you can't force a door open. Teach your staff to abandon your patient and hide if you have to. Obviously, when there's a shooting occurring, people self-evacuate. That has never been the issue. The issue is us trying to get in when they are self-evacuating. There was a surge plan in place at the hospital, but there was a lot of confusion going on. Here in the city of Chicago, anytime that there's an internal hospital disaster, and I'm sure it's the same where most of you work, your patients get diverted to other hospitals, but you're not the one deciding where everybody goes. You have a second party hospital. For us, it's Illinois Masonic, that helps to mitigate the event for any type of internal disaster. Unfortunately, that didn't happen here due to time constraints and the amount of confusion that was going on with multiple shooters. If you have to, like, as I like to refer to as stay and play, and you don't have the option, use the open beds upstairs in the PACU units or other units. Make sure that your hospitals immediately go on EMS diversion so that you're not accepting any more patients. Again, it's not an issue for us in the city of Chicago because we all work on the same radio frequency, but I worked in the suburbs for 10 years before I got on the Chicago, and we had different dispatch centers. So our main dispatch center has to let everybody in the area know that that hospital is closed and that they're going on an EMS diversion. And to make sure that you're bringing in crisis counselors. I think that we pretty much covered rural communities. As far as I understand that traumatic arrest would not be transported. You wouldn't waste your EMS resources on patients that you know are not going to make it when you have other critically injured patients. The hospitals, you're going to have to decide whether or not you can stay and play or you're going to load and go to a different area. You need to work with the hospital administration to come up with a coordinated plan because it's not just one-sided or the other. So since then, a lot of the staff, both for fire department and hospital, Dr. O'Neill was close to a lot of us, and with the Chicago Police Department, Officer Jimenez, they offered peer support lines, the EAP program that our department offers. No one took FMLA leave, and they did bring in PTSD debriefing and counselors to help with the people inside the hospital. So what do we do now that we know that this kind of stuff occurs, and how can we prevent it from happening? Well, I'm sure, as everybody knows nationally, there's a zero tolerance policy for any type of physical or verbal abuse against physicians and nurses and staff in hospitals. And that is not really enforced. And it has to do with the EMTALA considerations. I think it was 1986, that if you had no means to pay, they had to treat you. You have to be triaged and considered for treatment regardless of whether or not you have insurance or able to pay. So now what happens? I mean, what can we do to better protect our hospitals and our staff? I would like to kick some people out, but you know, we all know that that is not an option. And well, some of us would like that. Make sure that your hospital does not has sufficient staff training. Mercy Hospital was lucky that the week before that they did in-house training and this event actually occurred. So a lot of the hospitals here in the city of Chicago have metal detectors as you walk in from the ambulance entrance and from triage. Do I think that that is the end all be all answer? No, I don't. However, it could be a deterrent for anybody that really wants to. They're going to get through. Your security staff, are they trained what to do when they do find a weapon on a person walking in? Do they call for the police department? Are they able to secure that weapon themselves? Make sure that there's a procedure. And behavioral health and domestic violence and gangs. In the particular area I worked in was very high crime rate. That's why we had all the MCIs that we had, due to multiple victims shot at one location at one time, several times a day. But people who have behavioral health issues or gang violence, it is really difficult to try and stop those people at the doors as they pour in with family and friends. The one thing that I can say, if you excuse me for a second, I'm getting kind of dry. So the one great thing I could say about the Chicago Police and Fire Department is we actually train together to mitigate these types of events. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with rescue task force training. It's where 1 or 2 police officers enter a building during an active shooter situation with 2 or 3 medical trained fire personnel. That did not happen here because the events unfolded so quickly. So I'm sure much like you, we look at our active shooters as much like a hazmat situation. We have the cold zone on the outside of the event. That's like the safe zone. Then you have the warm zone. A warm zone and an active shooter for us would be the offender is still shooting, but the area of the building that we're entering is secured by officers so that there's very little threat that the shooter can come down on us. And then the hot zone or hot area, which is where the police are actually engaging with the shooter. I'm just going to throw all of these up here now so that you guys can see. One of the lessons that we learned was the EMS staging area was too close to the actual event. We had no idea how many ambulances we were going to need, and perhaps staging a block further from the hospital would have helped. Most ER rooms are, ER parking lots and entrances is like a horseshoe so that you can pull the ambulance in, drop your patient off and leave. That's how it was used in this event. We didn't have a forward command post established by CPD, meaning that, and I cannot stress this enough, any type of active shooter event is a police-driven event. I know that upsets a lot of fire chiefs and fire administration. However, none of us are armed. We don't carry weapons. Not even in the city of Chicago do we have vests. If we do, we have to buy them on our own, and they're expensive. That we should ever go in and attempt to mitigate any type of event like this. So what we do is we take a step back and we are support for the police officers, but the police officers decide where you get to move in a building. There was confusion about the address of the building because as you know, there's the main entrance to the hospital, then the ER entrance. You might have an occupational side. All 3 of those addresses are different on the hospital streets and numbers. And with multiple shooters being reported, it was unsure of where the police to respond. Security teams were not established by CPD. We just talked about that, rescue task force or contact. Delay in moving critical victims to level 1 trauma centers. The first victim, who was Dr. Tamara O'Neill, it took almost 20 minutes to have her at the destination hospital, which was only an 8-minute ride away. And the reason for the delay is because nobody knew where the shooter was. If the shooter was down, the police band and fire band are on 2 different channels, and us captains on the fire department or ambulance commanders, we can monitor the CPD channels, but we don't have access to all of the supervisor channels. Only our chiefs do. So it takes a while for information to trickle down. And as always, communication was an issue. I always think it's hilarious that in the fire service, if you're standing at a fire and at the end of the driveway, you cannot talk to the officer that is standing at the house on the front porch, but NASA could talk to the space station. So as always in fire service, poor communication was an issue because of the building construction and the hallways, and things were echoing. It says on here at the second to the last bullet point that fire and EMS worked well on recloning patients in the ER due to lack of direction by the hospital management. We didn't feel that it wasn't because management didn't know what to do. It's because of the people that are in charge at the hospital, and the hospital management did not push down their SOPs or SMOs to their employees for them to make decisions until someone else was put in charge. The positive takeaways, I'm just gonna throw, am I okay on time here, Barb? Okay, I just wanna make sure. We had change in both SOPs for CFD and CPD. So our 911 center is called the Offices of Emergency Medical Management Communication, sorry, the OEMC. And police sit on one side of the table in the building and the fire sit on the other. Well, what happened was, while this was occurring, duplicate resources were being called. So the police department wanted 2 public transportation buses and the fire department wanted 1, and somehow 6 ended up showing up. So what they did was, for any large scale events here in the city of Chicago, they have a large conference room and they put police and fire in the same room next to each other, so not to duplicate resources. We have an increase in multi-department exercises and equipment acquisition. We got a lot of grants for type of beacon and stop the bleed equipment that we did not have previously. I know you'll find it hard to believe, but we're behind the times when it comes to chest shields and quick clot and tourniquets. But now all of the police officers for the city of Chicago carry that equipment as well. The perimeter was established immediately. We decided right away what the hot zone was. The staging area manager was extremely effective. The first chief on scene was a EMS battalion chief, and he immediately started to call for additional resources, started to mitigate the event, help set up a parameter along with PD to make sure that everybody was safe, and started getting people, as they were self-evacuating, pointed in the direction. Forward Fire Command was established quickly, the incident command post. Again, we took CTA, which are our public transportation buses, and use those for evaluation for our green patients, but more importantly, our police department used them to hold for witness interviews, because now you have all of these people leaving the hospital and who were witnesses to all these event statements need to be taken. CFD and CPD worked together for 4 to 6 hours after the shooter was neutralized to make sure that everybody else in the building and in the hospital was safe. As always, communications were established quickly, but they were overwhelmed by the amount of information coming in, and the SOPs that were written and the SMOs that everybody uses. I would like to add that that should all not be written in stone, and that those should be considered guidelines, because you can't possibly predict what's going to happen sitting in an office on a tabletop writing these things down. As far as thank yous, before I take any questions, Terry Campbell, who I usually present with, who is not available today, but I want to thank her, Daddy Yang, who was the nurse at Mercy Hospital, Mike Knirk, CFD chief, Brian Bardsley, who heads the CPD SWAT medical team, and our dispatcher, David Akakaitis, who made these 911 tapes available to us. And thank you guys all very much.
All right. Well, thank you, Beth. That was really, really fascinating. Sadly fascinating. But any questions from the audience here? If you do have something, you can either put it in chat or unmute. And while you're thinking about that, we did have a question that I'd like to throw out to everyone. And I don't know if you can answer this, Beth, but maybe somebody in the group can. Utah is a right to carry state. I don't know if if Illinois is as well. But the question from Carrie Huntsman Jones was, are hospitals in Utah allowed to take away a weapon if they have a legal concealed carry permit? And we had one response that said no, but I just wanted to check with any law enforcement folks out there to see if anyone has an answer that might be different. Anyone?
We do have concealed carry here in the state of Illinois and in the city of Chicago. However, hospitals are no weapon zones. So you can, even with a concealed carry license, you are not able to enter. Our laws here are super strict. School buildings, hospitals, parks, there's a whole list of places that you're not able, certain restaurants, to bring in a weapon.
Yeah, I thought I had heard something about that here in Utah as well. I think churches were also on that list, but then they got pulled off of that list.
Right. I saw a really important question from Karen in the group chat. I think it was Karen. Oh, the safe word from Amy Davis. So here's the reason that you have to have a safe word and you can't yell all clear. What they learned from school shootings is if the shooter wanted to go into the principal's office and get on the PA and say that it's all clear and all of the children ran into the hallway, the shooter would have an open field day with these children. So each school in the city of Chicago and each hospital has their own safe word that only the hospital administration, and please tell your security guards in case this should ever happen in your city or town, knows, so that the staff knows that it's a true all clear, not just someone getting on the PA and announcing that everyone is safe.
Great. So there's several folks that are saying no, security couldn't take away the gun, but I believe they could restrict admittance. They could deny admittance to the hospital. Is that correct? If somebody still wanted to come in?
Hey, Barb, this is Brian Law.
Thanks, Brian.
Hey, yeah, so a hospital can deny entry to anybody for any reason. And if they have a policy saying no weapons and someone has a weapon, then they can deny them entry. But I wouldn't try to take a weapon away from anybody.
No, that doesn't end well for most people.
Hey, and Beth, the question on that safe word, it seems like a lot of the shootings that occur at places of employment are perpetrated by ex-employees or relatives employees. And so with that safe word, I really like that idea, but it could backfire if it's an ex-employee that comes back and uses that word to try to get people to come out. So I
agree with you. And we found the same issue with school shootings. Most school shootings are by current or ex-students. And so I agree with you for places of employment. I wish that I had like better answers, but we don't. But I can tell you that in this particular incident, that staff was not allowing police to come in to certain parts of the hospital and was refusing to open the doors. They were able to slide their ID badges underneath the door in some cases so that they could see they were actual officers, but.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. But again, like anything, it's got its plus and minuses.
Thanks, Brian. Anyone else have any questions or comments? No? All right. Well, I just wanted to, again, thank you, Beth, very much for presenting this important topic for us today. Thank you, everyone, for participating. And I also want to thank my colleague, Dr. Karen Blackwood, the director of the ICDP, who has helped to facilitate this presentation. This, as I said early on, was the second of 4 presentations that we will be doing. We will be doing one on the 11th and then again on the 18th of November. If you have not received the links for those yet, please let me know and I will resend them to you. Don't forget to do the SurveyMonkey. I just sent those links out to everyone. And if you have a group and you have not given me at least the number of people in your group, if you could just email that to me again at barb.clark@imail.org. That would help in our count. So that's all that we have for you folks today. Again, thank you. Oh, no, wait, there's some more, couple more messages just popped up, and they're all just accolades to you, Beth. Thank you so
much.
Well,
thank you.
They found it quite wonderful and informative and really appreciate you being here. It was quite the eye-opener.
Well, thank you very much. It's not something that we ever had anticipated ourselves. So as always, you fly by the seat of your pants.
Yep, and then we all learn from you and hope to do it.
And I've learned from others. So thank you guys very much. I really appreciate you guys coming in today and listening to me.
All right, great. Well, again, thank you. Appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and hopefully we'll see you all next Wednesday, same time, same place. All right.
Thank you, Barb.
Thank you, Beth. Okay, take care, everybody. Stay safe. And I'm just making sure here everybody's